So, if you were a gambling person in Europe, say around the year 1450, and you were placing bets on the survival of royal families,
Right. You're looking at the board?
you would not have put your money on Isabella of Castile. I mean, not a chance. The smart bet would have been on her just disappearing into a convent or being married off to some minor warlord or, frankly, being murdered before she turned 20.
It really is something of a miracle that she even survived her own childhood. We have this idea of monarchs, they inherit a stable system, maybe they throw a few banquets, fight a border skirmish, and then die peacefully in bed.
Yeah, that is not this story.
No. Isabella's story reads less like a history textbook and, well, more like a season of Game of Thrones that the writers decided was just too unrealistic to actually put on TV.
That is exactly the vibe I got from the research stack we're covering today. I mean, we're talking about civil wars, secret marriages, probably poisoned brothers, forged papal bulls.
And a complete restructuring of how global power even works.
And right at the center of it all is this woman who, by all rights, should have been a footnote, a complete footnote in history. Instead, she basically rewrote the map of the world.
She really did.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing on Isabella I of Castile. But our mission isn't just to list off dates and battles. We want to understand the mechanics of her rise. We want to see how a young girl who was, for all intents and purposes, a pawn in a very dangerous political game, managed to seize control and become the Catholic monarch.
And we need to look at the human being behind that title. Before she was the queen who funded Columbus or the one who finished the Reconquista, she was a survivor.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Let's look at the board as it stood when she was born. It's 1451. The place is Madrigal de los Altas Torres. Her father is King John II of Castile. Is she the heir?
Not even close. She is the spare to the spare. At birth, she's second in line. Her older half-brother Henry is ahead of her.
And Henry's an adult at this point, right?
He's already 26 years old. He's married. The assumption, the very, very safe assumption, is that Henry will have children, the line will continue through him, and, well, Isabella will be completely irrelevant to succession.
But the situation, it actually gets worse for her prospects, doesn't it? It deteriorates pretty fast.
It gets worse for her chances of getting the throne, yes. 2 years later, her younger brother Alfonso is born, and under the succession laws of Castile, a male heir takes precedence. So, boom. Isabella gets demoted to third in line. She's effectively pushed right off the political stage.
And then things get really messy. Her father, King John II, dies in 1454. Her half-brother becomes King Henry IV. Now, this is where the sources paint a really grim picture. You'd assume, okay, you're the king's half-sister, you'd be living in luxury, palaces, servants, the whole deal.
Quite the opposite. Henry IV effectively banishes them. He sends Isabella, her mother, who is also named Isabella, which can get confusing, and her little brother Alfonso to a town called Arevalo. And when you look at the records, the conditions there were shocking.
Define shocking for us. Are we talking like the castle was a bit drafty, or are we talking actual poverty?
We are talking struggling to make ends meet poverty. The sources are very explicit. They mention a serious shortage of money. And this is despite her father's will specifically saying that they should be financially taken care of.
So Henry just ignored it.
He didn't comply. It's not totally clear if he was just inept, which, given his track record, is very possible, or if he was intentionally keeping them weak.
It feels like a strategy to me. If they don't have money, they can't build a court, they can't bribe nobles, they can't threaten his power.
Exactly. But this period of poverty is where Isabella's character is really forged. This is the crucible for her. Her mother was a very, very devout woman, and in Arevalo, away from all the corruption and glitz of the court, Isabella was schooled in what historians call practical piety.
Practical piety. I like that term. What does it mean in this context?
It means that religion wasn't just some ritual for Sunday morning. It was a survival mechanism. It was the only constant, stable structure in an incredibly chaotic life. She developed this deep, almost rigid reverence for religion because everything else around her, her safety, her future, her finances, was completely unstable.
So while Henry IV is off in Segovia, basically mismanaging the entire kingdom, we're definitely going to get into that mess, Isabella's toughening up. She's learning to survive. But eventually, the chaos at court pulls her back in.
Yes. The political situation in Castile was deteriorating rapidly. The nobles were getting restless, crime was absolutely rampant, and Henry felt he needed to keep his potential rivals close. So when Henry's wife is about to give birth, Isabella and Alfonso are summoned back to the court in Segovia.
He wanted them under his thumb.
Under supervision, yes. And this leads us to one of the most bizarre and visual scenes in the entire source material, the deposition in effigy. I honestly had to read this part twice to make sure it wasn't some kind of metaphor. It's just a stunning piece of political theater. So the nobles, they're led by these really powerful figures like Juan Pacheco and the Archbishop of Toledo. They decide they have had enough of Henry IV. But they can't just kill him. That creates too many problems with legitimacy.
Right. A king killer is never popular.
So outside the city of Avila, they construct this large wooden platform, and on it, they put their statue.
An effigy of the king.
Exactly, an effigy of King Henry. It was dressed in mourning clothes, it was wearing the crown, holding the scepter, the whole royal getup, and then in front of a massive crowd, they systematically strip the statue. They take off the crown, they grab the sword, they take the scepter.
And then they just kick it.
They kick the statue right off the throne, shouting all sorts of abuse at it. And right there, on the spot, they crown Isabella's younger brother, Alfonso, as the rival king.
He was just a kid. How old was he?
He was a child, but to the rebels, he was Alfonso XII. And this kicks off a full-blown civil war. Castile is now split between two kings.
But then comes the twist.
Then comes the twist. In July 1468, Alfonso dies. He's only 14 years old.
And the sources mention a suspicion of poisoning, which seems plausible.
It was very strongly suspected by the nobles who supported him. I mean, it was just incredibly convenient for his enemies. And suddenly, the rebels don't have a king. Their figurehead is dead. So naturally, they turn to Isabella.
This is the critical moment. This is it. The most powerful nobles in the entire kingdom come to her and say, "We will make you queen. Lead the rebellion against your brother."
And this is where Isabella shows a level of political genius that absolutely nobody expected from a teenage girl who'd grown up in poverty. She says no.
She refuses the crown. That seems like the fastest, most direct way to power. Why on earth would she turn that down?
It's the fastest way to power, yes, but it's not the fastest way to legitimacy. Isabella argues that inherited succession is a divine principle. If she breaks that rule to take the throne by force, she sets a precedent that the throne can be taken by force.
Which means someone could do the same to her down the line.
Exactly. She wants to be the legitimate heir, not a usurper. She's playing the long game. She's thinking about the stability of her future reign, not just grabbing power in the moment.
That is just incredibly savvy. So if she won't fight him for the crown, she has to negotiate.
Precisely. She meets Henry at a place called Torres de Bisando, and they hammer out a treaty. The war stops. And in exchange, Henry names Isabella his heir presumptive.
This is a huge move, because Henry has a daughter, Joanna. By naming Isabella his heir, he's effectively disinheriting his own child. Why would a king do that?
Because there were rumors, very loud, very persistent rumors, that Joanna wasn't actually his daughter.
The sources refer to her as Joanna la Beltranea.
Right. It's a derogatory nickname. It refers to Beltran de la Cueva, who was a royal favorite at court. The scandal was that Beltran was the real father, not the king.
So whether it was true or not didn't even matter.
The doubt was strong enough for Isabella to leverage it. She essentially forced Henry to publicly acknowledge that his own daughter might be illegitimate.
So the treaty is signed. Isabella is officially next in line for the throne. But there's another clause in there, isn't there? Something about marriage.
A critical clause. Henry cannot force Isabella to marry against her will, but, and this is crucial, Isabella also has to get Henry's consent for any marriage she chooses. It was supposed to be a check and balance.
Which makes sense, because at this point, Isabella is the most eligible bachelorette in all of Europe, and everyone wants to use her as a political poker chip.
Oh, the list of failed matches is just exhausting. As a child, she was betrothed to Ferdinand of Aragon. That was actually the original plan. Then she was promised to Charles of Viana. He died, possibly poisoned. Then there was an attempt to marry her off to Afonso V of Portugal, which she flat out refused. There were even rumors of a match with Edward I of England.
But the one that really stands out as a total nightmare scenario is Pedro Girón.
This is a terrifying moment for her. Pedro Girón was the master of the Order of Calatrava. He was much older, a rough military man. This was not a political alliance, it was a cash deal. Girón was going to pay a huge sum of money to the royal treasury in exchange for Isabella's hand.
And King Henry, being broke, just agreed to it.
He agreed. Isabella is horrified. She's a teenager, and she is literally being sold to an older warlord. The sources say she prayed fervently, desperately to God that this marriage would not happen. She reportedly didn't eat or sleep for days.
Well, Jen.
And then Girón suddenly sickened and died while he was literally on the road to meet her for the wedding.
Wow. I mean, if you're Isabella, that has to reinforce your belief that God is personally managing your schedule.
It very likely did. But she was smart enough to know she couldn't rely on divine intervention forever. She needed a strong alliance, and she needed it fast. So she decided she wanted to go back to the original plan. Ferdinand of Aragon.
Her second cousin.
Yes, and this is the power couple move of the century. Aragon was this powerful neighboring kingdom with a strong military and a lot of Mediterranean influence. Uniting Castile and Aragon would create an Iberian superpower.
But there was a problem. A big one. You said they were cousins.
Second cousins. And in the eyes of the church, that creates an impediment called consanguinity.
Right.
They cannot marry legally without a dispensation. Basically, a permission slip from the Pope.
So why not just ask the Pope? Seems simple enough.
It's not that simple. The current Pope was afraid of angering the enemies of Aragon and Castile. Politics, again. He wouldn't sign it.
So they're stuck. They have this perfect political match, but they can't do it legally.
Well, this is where they get creative. They produce a papal bull from Pope Pius II authorizing the marriage.
What's the catch? There has to be a catch.
The catch is that Pope Pius II had been dead for years.
Wait, they forged it. They forged a papal bull.
It was almost certainly a forgery, or at the very least a highly suspect document that was sort of retroactively found. The future Pope Alexander VI, the infamous Rodrigo Borgia, helped facilitate things. But yes, the very foundation of this great Catholic union started with a significant amount of fraud.
That is unbelievably bold. So they have the fake paperwork. Now they just need to physically meet.
Yep.
But Isabella is being watched by her brother, the king.
She's essentially under house arrest at this point. She has to escape. She uses the excuse that she needs to visit her brother Alfonso's tomb in Avila to pray. It's a very dark excuse. But Henry couldn't really say no to a grieving sister.
And Ferdinand, how did he get there?
Ferdinand had an even more dangerous journey. He had to cross Castile, which was hostile territory, completely in disguise. He dressed as a servant, a mule driver, actually, and mixed in with a group of merchants.
Unbelievable.
They finally met in Valladolid and were married almost immediately, October 19th, 1469.
Talk about an elopement. King Henry must have been absolutely furious.
He was apoplectic. He declared the Treaty of Toros de Guisando null and void. He argued correctly that Isabella had violated the terms by marrying without his permission. He then reinstated his daughter Joanna la Beltranilla as the rightful heir to the throne.
So the peace is broken. When Henry dies in 1474, the stage is set for a massive showdown.
Exactly. Henry dies, and Isabella doesn't hesitate for a second. She doesn't wait for a council to convene. She immediately has herself proclaimed Queen of Castile and Segovia. She walks out in full regal robes with the sword of justice carried before her, which was a symbol usually reserved for kings, not queens. A real power move.
But Joanna claims the throne too, and she has some serious backup.
She does. Joanna is backed by her fiancé, who happens to be the King of Portugal. This kicks off the War of the Castilian Succession. And this isn't just a civil war anymore. This is now an international conflict involving Portugal and even France.
It's a brutal conflict, but the real turning point seems to be the Battle of Toro in 1476. And I want to dig into this because the military details are, well, they're confusing.
They are confusing because the battle was technically a total mess. It was indecisive.
Explain that. How can a battle that decides a war be indecisive?
Okay, so on the battlefield, the Portuguese forces completely routed the Castilian right wing. They won there. But the Castilian center-left, which was led by Ferdinand's commanders, beat the Portuguese troops they were facing. So at the end of the day, both sides were still standing, holding different parts of the field.
So militarily, it's a draw. Stalemate.
Militarily, yes. But this is where Isabella's genius for propaganda, for spin, really comes in. While the Portuguese were licking their wounds and trying to figure out what to do next, Isabella and Ferdinand sent out fast couriers to every single city in Castile.
Saying what?
Declaring a massive, crushing, divinely ordained victory. They organized processions, they held masses of thanksgiving. They completely controlled the narrative before the truth even had a chance to travel.
That is a masterclass in spin. We won because we said we won first.
Precisely. By the time the Portuguese army tried to claim it was a draw, the psychological war was already over. Isabella's supporters were energized, wavering nobles flocked to her side, and Joanna's supporters just began to lose hope. The Portuguese army, seeing their allies in Castile flaking away, eventually had no choice but to withdraw.
So propaganda won the war.
It certainly finished it, and this leads to the Treaty of Alcasovas in 1479, and this treaty is absolutely vital for understanding the future of the entire world.
Why? What did they agree to?
Portugal agreed to give up their claim to the Castilian throne. Isabella is now the undisputed queen. But there was a massive trade-off. Portugal got to keep all the Atlantic territories south of the Canary Islands. That meant they got the gold mines of Guinea, the Azores, Cape Verde, and the exclusive right to navigate and trade along the African coast.
And Spain got the Canary Islands.
That's it, just the Canaries. It seemed like a terrible deal for Spain at the time. They were effectively blocked from the lucrative African gold and spice trade. They were locked out of the Atlantic.
But this blockage is the key, isn't it? Because they couldn't go south.
They eventually had to consider going west. But yes, we'll get to that when we hit 1492.
Okay, so she has finally secured the throne. She's won the war. But the kingdom she inherited is a complete disaster. You mentioned earlier that under her brother Henry, crime was rampant.
It was lawless. I mean, robbery and murder often went completely unpunished. The nobility acted like little warlords in their own territories, enforcing their own laws. Isabella knew she couldn't build an empire on a rotten foundation. She had to become the domestic reformer.
What was her main tool for this? How do you even begin to police an entire country in the 1400s?
She established the Santa Herman Bad, the Holy Brotherhood. And you can think of this as the first state-controlled national police force. Before this, law enforcement was totally local, your village sheriff, basically. Isabella created a general police force for Castile, Leon, and Asturias.
And who paid for it? Because that's always the question.
The people did. It was paid for by a tax on households. And this was key because it allowed the force to be independent of the nobles. They answered directly to the crown.
That's a huge centralization of power.
It was. And she didn't just delegate either. The sources say that she and Ferdinand set aside Fridays specifically to sit and hear complaints from their subjects personally.
That is a very hands-on management style. It's Friday, time to judge some disputes.
It sent a clear message. The crown is watching, and the crown cares about justice. But she also had to fix the economy. Her brother Henry had sold off royal estates for pennies just to get quick cash. The crown was effectively broke.
So how do you fix that? You can't just print more money.
No, you claw it back. At the Cortes of Toledo in 1480, she pushed through this incredible measure, allowing the crown to buy back those estates at the original low prices at which they had been sold.
Wait, hold on. So if a noble bought an estate for, say, 100 coins 10 years ago, and now it's worth 1,000, she forces them to sell it back to her for 100.
Essentially, yes. It was a massive seizure of wealth from the nobility back to the state. It refilled the treasury, and it severely checked the power of the grandees, the high nobility.
She really wasn't afraid to make enemies among the most powerful people in her kingdom.
She balanced it by empowering a new class of people, the letrados.
Who were they?
These were university-trained lawyers and professionals, merit-based bureaucrats. She shifted administrative power away from the hereditary nobles and gave it to these educated professionals. The nobles could still attend the royal council, but she took away their votes. They became observers.
That's an incredibly modernizing move, replacing warlords with lawyers.
It created a professional government machinery that could actually run a nation. And she didn't stop there. She cracked down on the currency. Under her brother, there were over 100 illegal mints pumping out bad coins, debased currency. She shut them all down and stabilized the coinage.
It really sounds like she was building a machine.
Yeah.
And she needed that machine because 1492 is just around the corner.
The big year, 1492. It is just impossible to talk about Isabella without talking about this year. It's a year of incredible paradox, isn't it?
It really does seem like everything happened at once.
It's the year that defined Spain. And it started with the conquest of Granada. This was the end of the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to retake the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. Granada was the last holdout, the Nasrid dynasty.
This wasn't a quick battle, was it?
No, it was a grueling 10-year war. And Isabella was very involved in the logistics. She set up field hospitals, which was something quite new at the time. They used artillery in a way that hadn't really been seen before in Spain, blasting through medieval fortifications. Finally, on January 10th, 1492, the city surrendered.
The image of Isabella and Ferdinand entering the Alhambra, that must have been just incredibly symbolic.
It was the culmination of her life's work up to that point. And initially, the Treaty of Granada promised religious tolerance. Muslims were supposed to be allowed to keep their customs and their religion.
Though, spoiler alert, that didn't last very long.
No, unfortunately. That promise was broken by 1502. But in early 1492, the victory freed up resources, it freed up attention, and just in time because a certain Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus had been pestering the court for funding for years.
The famous Hail Mary pass. Why did she finally say yes? I mean, she had turned him down before.
Remember the Treaty of Alcasovas? Spain was blocked from Africa. Portugal controlled the entire route south. Columbus offered a loophole. Go west to get to the east. It was a huge gamble, but the cost wasn't actually that high compared to the war they had just finished fighting.
The sources say the crown paid a sum as a concession. It wasn't a huge royal investment, was it?
No. People often have this image of her pawning her jewels, but that's a myth. The funding came from the treasury and some private investors. It was a low-risk, potentially infinite reward scenario. If he died at sea, well, they lost a little bit of money. If he found a new route to the Indies, they beat Portugal and changed the world.
And we all know the outcome. He stumbled upon the New World.
Which led to another treaty with Portugal, the Treaty of Tordesillas, which literally divided the non-European world between them with a line on a map. But 1492 has a much darker side. While Columbus was sailing, Isabella made another decision that has permanently stained her legacy: the expulsion of the Jews.
The Alhambra Decree.
Issued in March 1492. It ordered all practicing Jews to either convert to Christianity or leave the country within 4 months, and they couldn't take gold, silver, or money with them when they left.
Why? But I thought the sources said she was initially opposed to it for economic reasons. I mean, Jews were a vital part of the Spanish economy and administration.
She was pragmatic, yes, but she was also under immense pressure from the Inquisitor General, Tomás de Torquemada. He argued that as long as an unconverted Jewish population remained, they would influence the conversos, Jews who had already converted to, slide back into their old faith. He convinced her that absolute religious unity was more important than economic stability.
And the numbers are debated, right? How many people were affected?
Recent historians estimate around 40,000 people left Spain. Many others converted to remain, but then, of course, they became the primary targets for the Spanish Inquisition, constantly suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. It was a human and economic tragedy that hollowed out a significant part of Spanish society.
So you have this incredible duality. In the same year, she funds the discovery of a new continent and simultaneously expels a massive established population from her own.
And that duality, that paradox, continues when we look at her stance on the New World itself. This is where the source material might really surprise people. There's a common assumption that the Spanish monarchy immediately endorsed and encouraged the enslavement of people in the Americas.
But Isabella didn't.
No, her reaction was quite the opposite. When she learned about the indigenous people in the New World, she immediately declared them subjects of the Crown of Castile.
What does that mean legally? Subjects.
It means they have rights. You cannot enslave your own subjects. When Columbus returned from his second voyage with, I think, 1,200 enslaved men, Isabella was reportedly furious. She ordered them all to be returned to the Americas. The sources say she even threatened Columbus with arrest over it.
That's a fascinating conflict, the Queen versus her star explorer.
She wrote in her last will, very, very explicitly, that the indigenous people should be treated fairly and given justice if they were wronged. In her mind, the New World was a spiritual mission, an expansion of her Christian flock, not just a labor pool to be exploited.
Of course, we have to acknowledge that the reality on the ground in the Americas was often horrific, despite her orders from across the ocean.
That's true. The distance made enforcement nearly impossible, and her successors weren't always as rigorous. The encomienda system, which was essentially a form of forced labor, still proliferated. But her personal policy was distinctly anti-slavery regarding the indigenous population, which was a very unique stance for a European monarch at that time.
Let's pivot for a second to her cultural legacy. We often think of her as this warrior queen, the reformer, but she was also an intellectual patron.
She absolutely was. In that same pivotal year, 1492, she patronized the publication of the Gramática de la Lengua Castellana by Antonio de Nebrija.
The first grammar of a modern European language.
Exactly, and Nebrija famously told her that language is the instrument of empire. They understood that to build a unified nation, you needed a unified language. But her patronage went further. She also supported women in education.
The learned girls, the puedact.
Yes. She cultivated a court of educated women. She even supported Luisa de Medrano, who became the first female professor in Europe, teaching Latin at the prestigious University of Salamanca. Isabella's court was a place where a woman could actually be a scholar.
Which makes a lot of sense, considering she was a woman ruling in her own right, constantly having to prove she was just as capable, if not more so, than any king.
She even had a motto for her co-rule with Ferdinand, Tanta Manta.
They amount to the same, or equal opposites.
It meant equality, equal opposites in balance. She wasn't just Ferdinand's wife, she was the Queen of Castile, and he was the King of Aragon. They were partners, but she held the reins of power in Castile firmly in her own hands.
We've talked about her incredible rise and her transformative reign, but we have to talk about how it all ended. Because for all her political victories, her personal life at the end was just one tragedy after another.
It's the tragedy of a dynasty. Isabella's goal, her entire life's work, really, was to secure the future of her united kingdoms through her children. She planned their marriages meticulously to ally Spain with Portugal, with the Habsburgs in Austria, and with England.
But the plan just fell apart.
It collapsed piece by painful piece. Her only son, John, Prince of Asturias, was the great hope for the future. He married a Habsburg princess, but he died suddenly in 1497, just a few months after the wedding.
That must have been absolutely devastating. The male heir is gone.
It broke her, by all accounts. But then her eldest daughter, also named Isabella, who was Queen of Portugal, she became the heir. But then she died in childbirth in 1498. Her infant son, Isabella's grandson Miguel, was the next heir. He died at age 2.
It's like a curse. One after another after another.
It left the succession to her third child, Joanna,
who history remembers as Joanna the Mad.
Joanna was married to Philip the Handsome of the Habsburg dynasty, and Joanna's mental instability was a source of great anxiety for Isabella. She knew that passing the crown to Joanna essentially meant passing it to her husband Philip and the Habsburgs.
The Trascamer line, Isabella's own family line, was effectively coming to an end.
And that's what happened. Isabella died in 1504 at Medina del Campo. The causes cited are uterine cancer or dropsy. She was only 53, but she had been in physical and emotional decline ever since Prince John died. She officially withdrew from all government duties weeks before the end.
And she is buried in Granada, right? The site of her greatest victory.
In the Royal Chapel of Granada, right alongside Ferdinand. It's fitting. That was their great project together.
So when we look back at Isabella I of Castile, what is the final takeaway? How do we sum her up?
She took a fragmented, bankrupt, lawless collection of territories and turned it into the first modern global superpower. She finished the Reconquista, she launched the Age of Exploration, and she established the first modern police force in Europe.
But at the same time, she launched the Spanish Inquisition and expelled the Jews from her kingdom.
Yes, it is a legacy of incredible, world-changing achievement and profound, brutal intolerance. You cannot separate the two. Her relentless drive for unity, religious unity, political unity, linguistic unity, is what made Spain so powerful, but it's also what caused so much suffering.
And here's a thought to leave you with. We mentioned the tragedy of her son, Prince John, dying so young.
The great what-if of Spanish history.
If Prince John had lived, the Spanish crown would have remained with the House of Trastamara. Spain would have remained a distinct Iberian entity, separate from the vast Habsburg Empire of Central Europe.
Exactly. There would have been no Emperor Charles V ruling half of Europe from Spain to Germany. The Protestant Reformation might have played out entirely differently. The entire political map of modern Europe is, in many ways, the result of that one young man's untimely death.
Isabella built a world, but in the end, she couldn't control who would inherit it.
That's the ultimate limit of power, isn't it?
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Isabella of Castile. It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and treaties. It's about people, their choices, and sometimes their sheer dumb luck.
And their resilience.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.